Good evening, and welcome to this month's December 2023 Whisky Me Live tasting. It's our Christmas tasting, which is why I hope everyone remembered to wear Christmas-themed attire. This is about as close as I get to a Christmas jumper. Welcome, and thanks for joining us. First of all, must start with an apology. As I mentioned in the email which we sent out this morning, it's tricky planning this tasting. The way in which the monthly dispatches lie and the way in which the tasting normally sits, or the part of the month where the tasting normally sits, means that we are encroaching on the Christmas break. And it's always tricky to get distillers' brands pinned down on dates. I think A, because a lot of people are just kind of signing off for Christmas early, and B, because there's also, a fair amount of events going on and tastings and things like that booked. And we thought we had this one nailed, then we didn't, and then we thought we had it, and then we didn't, and now we do have it half nailed. Half in that we've got Hugh from James Eady to join us very shortly to talk about Benrinnes. But unfortunately, we're not going to be joined by anyone from Westland tonight. This situation there was exacerbated by the 8 or 9 hour time difference and the communication over the weekend and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, you get the point. So huge apologies there. If you're sort of waiting out for that, then it's not going to happen. What I would say though, by way of compensation, is that I think it was in January or February of 2022, so almost 2 years ago, we did American Oak, and in fact, I think it was Burns Night, because on that very famous Whisky Me Live broadcasting, I attempted to read some Burns poetry in a Scottish accent, and everyone said I sounded Irish, and that might be because I actually am half Irish. Anyway, I digress. If you would like to learn a little bit about Westland, or a lot about Westland, because it was a great chat, do go back to that recording on January or February 2022. Would have been January, right? Because Burns Night's in January. Because it's really insightful. What it doesn't talk about specifically is this month's whiskey, the Sherry Wood. But what I might do is at the end of this, after we've chatted with Hugh, is just give a few sort of brief words on that and my impressions, and then we'll take it from there. But yeah, apologies again that we've not managed to nail it this time. Promise it won't happen again in the future. Anyway, that's 3 minutes of me talking. That's enough. Let's bring in Hugh from James Eady, and we will start talking about the whiskey that we can talk about. Hey, Hugh, how you doing?
Hi, Justin. I'm very well, thank you. Sorry, I didn't get the memo about the Christmas jumper, so I'm actually not so festive. So I do apologise for that. I'm just
don't worry. I'm just going to adjust that so our heads at the same height and people's eyes don't get really messed up. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't give the memo out. I just thought it was like standard operating procedure this time of year.
No. 18th December, or whatever it is. It's everyone wears a Christmas jumper.
Yeah. I think a year or two ago, I dressed up as an elf, and no one really commented on it. So I was just like, I don't think I'll do that again.
Yeah, you didn't get any positive feedback or negative, so it's probably...
Yeah, it's weird. It was the worst outcome of all. It was just kind of like, oh, well.
No reaction.
Right. Thanks so much for joining us, Hugh. Appreciate you got a busy schedule. So we've got this month, we are featuring, God, my camera's so bad, that just looks like a white label. There you go, yours is better.
You and Tom on the front label.
Yeah, that's what the pigs are designed to represent, myself and Tom. Yeah, perfect. Well, what I was actually saying, and I'm jumping ahead, is that I've always considered Benrinnes to be quite a kind of meaty dram, up there almost with like mortlach and everything. So when we were discussing what would go on the label and the pigs came up, it was like, yeah, pork, pigs kind of seems fitting.
Yeah, that for vegetarians, that no pigs were harmed in making of this whiskey. But absolutely, I agree with you. Benrinnes has that notoriety of being a meaty whiskey, so alongside mortlach and Dallion, which makes it very popular for blends. So that's why you don't really see it as a single. A lot, Flora and Fauna, Diageo's Flora and Fauna releases that comes out once a year. But otherwise, it's mainly used for blending, which in turn means us independent bottlers managed to get our hands on it, and it's a pleasure to be able to do this as an exclusive to Whisky Me and to show all your subscribers Benrinnes in its truest form.
Yeah, That's the cool thing about it, I think, and we'll come on to that because, again, I think maybe it's on account of the meatiness, and again, Mortlach and Dalnewen's sort of guilty of this too. Often it ends up in sherry casks, and this is not a sherry cask, and so you kind of get a different light shone on it. Anyway, we'll get to that shortly. I want to talk a bit more about Benrinnes, but let's start with you and James Eadie, and maybe let's talk a little bit about the history of James Eadie and how you guys operate.
Oh, of course, yeah. So at James Eadie was my boss's great-great-grandfather, who was a Scottish brewer, but moved down to Burton and set up his brewery on Cross Street in 1854. And then by the time he died, he had 250 pubs, and in every single one of his pubs was James Eadie's trademark X, blended whiskey alongside his beer. Sadly, after James Eadie died, his family sold the business to Bass, so a big brewing company, and they stopped producing the whiskey in 1946. And so my boss, Rupert Patrick, who's James Eadie's great-great-grandson, has revived it using the ledgers, James Eadie's ledgers. So the same 14 whiskies that go into our trademark X today are the same that were in the whiskies in the whiskey back in the 19th century. So our history is actually in brewing, but the revival of the company happened in 2017 when we released James Eadie's trademark X. And actually, Benrinnes is one of the ingredients in the blend. So out of the 14 whiskies, 2 grain, 12 malts, Benrinnes plays a big part in our blend. But in the modern day, we are also an independent bottler, which means we don't own a distillery, but we buy casks and we sort of build up our own sort of warehouse, and we hand select our casks into our bottlings, either small batch, which is your Benrinnes here, single cask, or cask finishing. So everything we do at James Eadie dates back or goes back to James Eadie's ledgers. So the small batch, the labels aren't actually a self-portrait of Tom. It's actually named after one of his pubs, which is the Pretty Pigs Inn in Tamworth, which he bought probably in around about 1890s. And then single cask is the only thing that we don't really do much to the whiskey, which is where we taste the cask and we really like it, we put it into the bottle. And our third range is our cask finish range, where we only finish in the same types of casks James Eadie used to finish his whiskies in. So not only in the ledgers did he tell us what was in the blend, he told us what he matured his whiskies in, and there were 5 different types: so sherry, Madeira, Marsala, Malaga, and brandy. So that is all about the balance between distillery character and the cask finishing. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. We have our blend, James Eadie's trademark X, which is the revival of an old Scottish blend, and then we do our independent bottling that we release twice a year, so a spring release and an autumn release, because they're limited in that. So that's a very, very brief history of what we do. But fundamentally, we haven't created a new company. We've just copied what James Eadie was doing 150 years ago or so.
Yeah. So with the blend, and I mean, I guess generally with the sort of ethos of how you're operating, how important is it to sort of be historically accurate to what he was doing over innovating something new? Where does the sort of balance sit there?
So definitely as Rupert was starting out, so in the recipe, I can name them all, but I'll probably make a fool of myself with subscriptions. But 2 of the distilleries are actually closed now, so Cambus and Littlemill. So I
was going to ask about that as well, because a lot of distilleries have closed.
Yes, yeah. So 1993 and 1994 are the years that Cambus closed in 1993. Is now the Cooperage de Diageo, and Littlemill burnt down in 1994, I think. But when we were starting out, or when Rupert was starting out back in sort of 2016 for the 2017 release, he wanted them to be in the blend, although we know in the future that we won't be able to put that in. So it's very important to sort of stick to the original recipe as close as we could do. Actually, there were 16 in the original, but 2 of those distilleries closed down at the beginning of the 20th century. So we don't have there's no liquid around for us to put that into the blend. And then transparency. So it's also transparency behind it. So that's why we tell you the 14 whiskies in the blend. And actually, the way we've got our flavor, the flavor profile of the blend is if you go on our website, you'll see that sort of the unveiling of it is Rupert was looking for one of these old bottles of whiskey when he was looking to revive it, and he went on all the sort of auction houses and asked all the collectors if they've ever had James Eadie's trademark X. And his uncle, who sent him on the sort of odyssey, phoned him up, being like, "How's it all going?" And Rupert's like, I've got all the whiskey, but I just don't know what it tastes like, because it's very important if we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly. And I can't find a bottle of an old bottle from 1946. And his uncle said, well, I've got a case of it in my cellar. So he, it was right under his nose the whole time. And if you go on our website and you watch the video, you'll see Norman Matheson, our master blender, Rupert and Leon, who looks after all the logistics, sort of opened the bottle with 2 whiskey writers, Dave Broom and Tom Bruce Condine. And from that tasting, that's where we get our flavor profile as well. So transparency and trying to be as close to the original as possible. And I think a bit more about what we do at James Eady's. We're very keen whiskey historians in that sense. So we have also released 2 history books on whiskey.
I was going to ask about this. Yeah.
So everything we do sort of goes back to the past. So the way we sort of see it is we look back into the past and see how we can move it forward into the future, or use the old school sort of tactics or techniques is probably a better word, and bring them back if they've been forgotten.
Yeah. So the first book you did, I have a copy of that, which is the kind of.
Yeah.
Say again, sorry.
It's a massive doorstop.
It's enormous. Yeah, it's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a snapshot of what not just whiskey, because there's gin distilleries in there as well, isn't there? But the whole kind of distilling industry in the UK was. It's in the 1920s. Is that 20s, right?
Yeah. So it's in between the Great Wars. The Great War.
And was it a compilation of articles published in some?
Yeah, in the spirits journals of the time. So Leon, who I mentioned earlier. So there's only 3 of us who work at James Eady. There's Rupert the boss, Leon, who does probably 90% of the work, and then I do the sales, which is probably 1% of the work. So I'll credit Rupert for doing the other 9%. But Leon is a historian by trade. So when he started working, when Rupert and sort of started working together, he was in the British Library trying to find as much information on James Eady as possible, sort of in the archives. And he came across all these articles, as you say, from the distilleries in the 1920s. The thing that really took him back, and where he realized that this is incredible, is the previous book before, Alfred Barnard, is the first sort of account of all these distilleries. But he didn't have any images. So whilst Leon was flicking through all of these, he realized that there was images, so people could actually see what the distilleries actually looked like, rather than it being sort of written down. So he basically compiled all of those distilleries, and the only one missing is Port Ellen, because someone's obviously gone through it and just taken out Port Ellen, and they didn't carry on looking. So they found Port Ellen, and I don't need the rest. So I think it took 7 years for Leon to compile it. We've worked with the British Library, so they modernized all the photos and everything and compiled it into this amazing book.
Yeah, I mean, we won't go on about it too much, but I think it's not too much of an overstatement to say that this is like one of the most important whiskey books published in living memory. There are obviously great whiskey books out there. I mean, some of them behind me, but written by great authors. But this is a historical chronicle, really, of whiskey in that period, which it's just so little of it was written down. And of course, distilleries have their own records and bits and pieces, but they're not really writing summaries of their operations and what they're making and that sort of thing. And if anyone's familiar with the Alfred Barnard book, which was late 20th century, the James Eady book is very much of a similar ilk. But 30 years later, when by that point the industry had a massive sort of downturn, and then was because you got Great Depression and everything in there, so it was a really changing period for it. Anyway, it's amazing. Although a very limited number of copies, and also quite expensive.
About 1,000 books. Yeah, there's 1,000 copies. And it's also, as you say, just last bit on it, because I'm sure everyone wants to start drinking whiskey. Rather than the history of it. It's sort of an insight before the modern technologies took over in whiskey. So you're seeing how the old there's sort of the last old techniques of this sort of handmade spirit in there as well. And there's a few distilleries that haven't changed. So Leon went around one of them and he looked at the book and goes, it's literally the same. from
Which one was that? Do you know?
Well, it's extremely popular, so it is Springbank.
Of course, it's Springbank.
Yeah. So nothing has really changed.
No. If I was going to guess,
Yeah.
Okay.
But we'll go on to we'll talk about
yeah. So Benrinnes, which we actually featured. So as you sort of mentioned before we started, it's a Diageo-owned distillery, sort of medium size, very much, operating to fulfill blends because it has this distinct characteristic to it, like Mortlach, Dahluen, and there's never any official releases of it, never any distillery bottlings as such, besides the Flora and Fauna range. And we in Whisky Me, I think we featured most of the Flora and Fauna bottlings over the years at some point or another. There's only a handful we haven't done. We did do Benrinnes years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And it's a brilliant bottling, around about 50 quid. I think it's a 16-year-old.
Yeah, 16, 15, I think.
15 or 16. Maybe, and very sherried and delicious. It's, I remember visiting the distillery at the time. I think I've been there twice now. They don't have a visitor centre or anything like that. So, yeah.
The hard hats on and walking through it.
The hard hat distillery. And I think I might have had an argument with one of the distillery workers there, actually. It's one of the only times I've fallen out with anyone at the distillery. It's just been a bit of a dick. Anyway. But it is really genuinely one of my favorite Speyside distilleries because it has such a distinctive meaty character. And so when we were in conversation with you about selecting casks to do a bottling, I was so excited to do a bourbon cask or American oak cask rather than sherry, because it sort of lifts this veil of sherryness that I think is so commonly associated with this distillery, even amongst independent bottlers. A lot of the time, it seems to be, in my experience, sherry cask. And so you actually get to sort of drill down to what that distillery character is underneath all of that, because of course, American oak is just a little bit more sympathetic to treasuring that distillery style.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we try and achieve with our small batch range, is to use these sort of blending malts, we call them, that people haven't really seen as a single, and show you a good distillery example, good distillery character example. So we tend to use refill and first fill bourbon casks. So this one here, your one here is 2 refill bourbon casks and 1 first fill bourbon cask. And the reason why we use those combinations is the 2 refill give a bit of sort of body, so a bit of quite a lot of liquid in that sense. So it's about 500 bottles, but refill really hasn't played too much part in the distillery character, or the distillate, shall we say. So you're sort of getting a raw form or a less adulterated form of the spirit in refill bourbon, and then we add a first fill bourbon just to give it a bit of sweetness, because sometimes refill can be a bit too much of the distillery in that sense. So using refill and first fill bourbon give you a great example of what Benrinnes is. Now, we use Benrinnes a lot in our cask finish range as well. So we finish it in Madeira and sherry because it's got this meaty, strong quality. And so it's great for us. I think we've done this is our 3rd small batch version of it. So it tends to be our guinea pig. When we started our cask finish range, we said, well, if Benrinnes can't stand up to it, then no other distillery will stand up to it, because it has of that meatiness, which comes from the worm tubs, basically, and the way it's distilled as well. So they have a low cut rate and everything like that.
Yeah, they've got some, I like Mortlach, they have some, or I think they've changed it over the years, but they have some weird distillation process, don't they? Where, I mean, I don't know if you can explain
more normal now.
Yeah, it has changed, hasn't it? But it used to be kind of, it used to be kind of considered as 2.5 times distilled or something, and
depending on the people who really know their stuff. I say people say 2 3/4 or something like that.
Yeah,
some people get almost like the number pi. They can get it to the I'm not going to tell you that. But that's when they used 3 stills, and they were 3/4 full, and one would have lower faints in it, and one would have higher faints in it, and it was all all a balancing act. But they stopped that in 2007, I think. I think they started in the 1970s and it went all the way to 2007. So if you look on a bottle of Benrinnes and you see 2006, this one is from, well, this would be from 2014 or something, because actually there's 2 ages in here. Your first all bourbon is a 10-year-old and your 2 refills are 9 years old. But by law, we have to say 9. But if you look on the bottle, it says anything pre 2007. Some people will get very excited about that because it's a very distilling technique.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as you say, this meatiness comes about as a result of the sulfur compounds from the worm tub condensation rather than the distillation itself. A lack of sort of copper contact in that stage. But it's weird because malt lac, of course, is also associated with a strange 2.81 times distillation process. And so I think a casual observer will be forgiven for thinking that the key to meatiness is to distill it somewhere between 2.5 and 2.9 times.
And historically, if you look at Irish whiskey, which is seen as lighter, I wouldn't say smooth, but lighter, that's triple distilled. So it sort of contradicts itself. It's having a longer distillation than the other two, or the other distilleries, but it's coming out meaty. And it is, as you say, it's all about the copper contact. So the stills are short and dumpy, and then they have this freezing cold worm tub at the back of the lin arm. So the vapors just turn into liquid straight away. So they don't sort of go down more, or they don't have copper contact. And another way you could do that is you have a very quick distillation. So you sort of fire up the stills very quickly and don't do it gradually. So there's various ways that people play around with it, but to get this sort of sulfury thing, it's basically do not let it touch too much copper.
And sulfur. If you talk, I mean, I've spoken to rum distillers before and cognac distillers or cognac makers, and sulfur is normally considered to be, very much a negative flavor characteristic in a spirit. But the weird thing is when you put sulfurous spirit into casks, it sort of transforms from like that struck match aroma to this meatiness in some kind of magical process that I don't understand.
No, again, leave it up for the science. I got a D in chemistry at GCSE, so not my place to comment on that. But I think also what's surprising, because sherry has sort of those sulfury notes as well. So you would think, well, you don't want to over sulfur it, but with whiskey, you have that sort of different flavor profile of sort of using the stronger faints to bring in more of that sort of meatiness. Or you have people who prefer, more copper contact, lighter style. So, and then the maturation time and what you mature it in and how it all balances with the distillate all matters. So again, at James Edie, we're only controlling the maturation. We're not controlling the production. So we have this whole thing of it doesn't matter how old it is. It's just when it's ready, it's ready. And that very much comes from Norman Matheson, our master blender, who's been blending since the 70s. And the late 60s, and he's doing it for us now. He goes, whiskey's a natural product, so when it's ready, it will let you know. You can't really speed it up. So that's why this Benrinnes works so well as a 9-year-old, because when Tom and yourselves tried it, you saw the qualities there, and it's not over matured, and the meatiness is it's not too potent, which it could be. I mean, I've never had the luxury of trying new make Benrinnes, but it's getting that balance between that real meatiness, as you say, sort of struck match, or eggs, as people smell an old sulfur, and then getting it to the right time. And that's timing, and that's part of the whiskey game.
Yeah, I mean, to give another example of what sort of waiting for whiskey to be ready, we bought some casks. We've bought a few casks over the years. One of which we bought about 4 years ago, at 13 years old, I think, from a distillery that I'm not going to name at the moment because we will release it at some point. Thinking, well, this won't be long till it's ready. And here we are. It's now 17 years old. I tasted it about 6 months ago. Second fill or whatever. It's, the cask has already had, somewhat of a life experience. but we have every hope it will get there. It's getting there slowly, but it might be 20 years old before it's ready, which it's kind of exciting and cool,
Yeah, and that's part of the sort of watching the whiskey mature in the barrel is all about. And I think that's probably the romantic side of whiskey is when it's it takes a long time for it to be ready, and you have to be patient. You can't force it into something it doesn't really want to be. And that's again the same with the casks that we've used here. So the 3 casks that we've used here, you and Tom tried them individually, and then you've added them together because you can't really hide them, especially when you're only using 3 casks. You can't hide up any discrepancies. In it. So it's just when it's ready. I mean, it's infuriating because obviously we need whiskey to sell if I still want to stay in the job in that sense. So it needs to be ready occasionally. But there are sometimes, and luckily Rupert, who's been a whiskey man, his first job was at McLeod's in 1990, so he understands the process. But it's very much Norman's philosophy is what's carried us over into our small batch ranges or our single malt ranges. And actually, talking about Norman, Benrinnes is his favourite distillery. So being a blender, it's so popular with blenders because of that meatiness and that quality. And you don't really get that many distilleries that do it. Now, Mortlach is obviously the beast of Dufton, and now gets rolled out across the world. So they don't really want to use that for blends. And then you've got Dal Ewan, but because of Clynelish has become so popular, they're changing Dal Ewan slightly to make it more waxy, so it can fill in what Clynelish used to do. So Benrinnes is one of those last real meaty distilleries, and definitely on the Diageo portfolio, because you've got Cragganmore is the other one seen as meaty. So Benrinnes is really a cornerstone of a lot of blends, and it produces. And you said earlier, sort of a moderate distillery only produces 2.5 million litres a year, and that's all going into blends in that sense. So it's a very impressive distillery that luckily stays in the shadows, because you don't want this to sort of become the next big brand. Otherwise, all the blenders will be deeply upset.
And literally in the shadow of Benrinnes itself, which I think is the highest peak in. I think it might be the highest peak in the Cairngorms. I think so. I was actually fortunate enough to do a kind of silly foot race endeavour thing from Braemar up to Dufton back in the summer, and the last bit was running up some of Benrinnes and up to the top, and the weather was atrocious when we got to the top. It was the worst weather we experienced the entire 2-day jaunt.
That's a hell of a trek, and I guess you didn't have a whiskey at the top. You had to get back down and finish the race before you could enjoy it.
You know what? I did have a whiskey at the top. I
was speaking to someone who had a Benrinnes on top of Benrinnes, but they also said they were walking with the locals, and she used to call the whiskey Benrinnes, and they went, no, it's called Benrinnes. So he goes, well, the mountain's called Benrinnes as well, and goes, oh, we're walking up Benrinnes then? He goes, no, you're walking up Benrinnes. So they call it the hill Benrinnes and the whiskey Benrinnes, but I don't know. But she did say the best whiskey she's ever had is a Benrinnes on Benrinnes, which I can.
Well, imagine. I was drinking Glenfiddich because the thing that I was doing was sort of all organised by Glenfiddich, so which you can actually see Glenfiddich from the top of Benrinnes, so it all kind of makes sense. You're looking
at all their warehouses. Across the land.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's a lovely part of the world. Again, so my mum's from sort of Aberdeen side, so Speyside's always played a big part of my sort of upbringing, and it never fails to amaze me when you're in Speyside. It's sort of like that mythical whiskey land. And you just see distilleries just pop out, and it's the most amazing place. It really is
Whiskey Disneyland, and you're kind of going around to different rides.
Yes, it is a bit of that. And then you can see the hill of Benrinnes from the new McCann distillery. And when I was there last year, it was covered in snow. It's absolutely stunning. But it's a very I wouldn't say underappreciated or underrated. It's just a very unseen.
Well, no visitor centre, no kind of real bottlings. That's kind of what you get. It is funny though. We talked about Mortlach a bit, and again, we featured Mortlach in the past too. I mean, that was in the same situation as Benrinnes a few years back. So that was 16-year-old. I think Benrinnes was 15.
Yeah.
Mortlach 16 flora and fauna, which was always highly prized, and not a million miles from Benrinnes 15. And Diageo chose to turn that one into the big brand and give it the kind of glow up and charge twice as much for it. And it is what it is now. And sort of, in a way, something's kind of been lost there, in all of that, a sort of hidden gem of Speyside whiskey. And I think that all makes the likes of Benrinnes all the more, to be treasured, because it's sort of unaffected by all that sort of stuff and still a bit of a secret distillery.
Exactly. And it also proves, in the modern day, obviously single malts are very popular, but it's still blending is the cornerstone of whiskey, or the main part of whiskey. And every distillery, especially the old ones, I mean, Benrinnes was built in 1926. Back then, it was all about blending, and it is an ingredient. It's an ingredients for a blend. So all the distilleries, bar the new ones, were made to be an ingredients for the blend. And you're seeing Benrinnes' sort of ingredients credentials there. So it needs to stay sort of unseen in that sense. So because 2.5 million litres are going into Johnny Walker and all these massive blends. That keeps the industry ticking, shall we say?
Yeah. Right. Let's. I'm going to get up some tasting notes because they've been coming in. What do we got? Citrus on the palate. This is Liz. Citrus on the palate. Lemon and orange. There is I think that youthfulness still means that there's that kind of freshness to the dram for sure. Yeah.
Especially with those two refill bourbons, it's just keeping that really, really fresh. Yeah. I get stewed fruits for me, so sort of apples and red apple, I think comes through.
Yeah, nice. Bourbon pepper finish goes nice to lemon with the oiliness, and certainly there is that oiliness. And I think again, worm tubs and short stills are probably the contributing factor in that.
Absolutely, yeah.
What else have we got? Well, we've just got compliments on your history chat.
Well, you didn't fall asleep at that.
Citrus as well. I can't remember what we put in the tasting card. I haven't got one in front of me, but I think it might have been lemon, leather, and something else.
3 L's.
Yeah. And this is a good show. Cold meats and a bit of cheese for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. This is a whiskey made for that because it's got the meatiness there, which can stand up to it, and the freshness there too. But it's not going to kind of get bogged down and like too heavy with sort of lighter cheeses and bits and pieces.
Yeah, I always find it whenever I say it's quite a meaty whiskey, people go, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And you can't really say, "Well, it tastes like a steak or anything." So it's very hard to sort of what meatiness means, but it is that. Sort of
it's definitely true. It's more about weight and sort of. It's like brawn, right? There's something, yeah.
But it is made out of barley, water, and yeast, so there's nothing in it. But there is just something if you tried Mortlach and Benrinnes and Daoyu next to each other, you would all sort of understand. You understand?
Yeah, or indeed tried them against 3 other whiskies that don't possess that same quality to contrast. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, that's fantastic. Is there anything else to do? Everyone's had a few drinks now, I think. Right. So, what shall I do next? I tell you what. I know you haven't got any, Hugh, but just for the benefit of everyone, we'll taste a little bit of Westland. As I mentioned already, we unfortunately, for anyone that's just tuned in and is waiting for the Westland chat, we weren't able to get anyone from Westland this time. We had something scheduled. It fell apart. We thought it was fine. Then it wasn't. They're in Seattle. It's Christmas. And I can come up with some other excuses as well, but ultimately our bad.
And it's probably my bad as well because I was like, well, I can't do this date.
Well, you were part of the reason the date changed for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I just made sure we didn't look bad.
Yeah. But also, as I mentioned at the start, we did do Westland American Oak about 2 years ago. it was our special Burns night tasting where I did a Burns recital. You're gonna have to go check it out here. It was really phenomenal. And it's worth watching because it was a really good chat that we had about Westland and what they're doing up there. It is a remarkable distillery, and it's very much because I've actually visited there in the past, and of pretty much there's not many distilleries I can think of in the US, and bear in mind there are now over 1,000 American whiskey distilleries that are so Scottish in their sort of sensibilities and the way in which they make whiskey. It's all double distillation. It's fermented in washbacks. One distinction is that they use 5 different types of barley in their mash, which you wouldn't actually be allowed to do this in Scotland, I don't think, but they use like chocolate malt and like sort of dark roasted malts. So
they're going back to heritage malts.
And it's cool. So they're almost approaching the brewing side like a brewer, and then they're making it into whiskey, which is really cool. But they're very much taking a sort of Pacific Northwest approach to this whole thing. So it's almost like they've used the blueprint of a Scotch whiskey distillery, and then they're going, right, now how can we find peat locally and use that to smoke our malts? And is there a type of oak that we can use to keep our own barrels that's indigenous to the Pacific Northwest? And all of these little investigations are going on in order to kind of cement an identity onto the whiskey, which is really cool. And they're all in various stages of, because I mean, if you decide you're going to make barrels out of, Washington State oak, you're not releasing a whiskey with it the next year. You've got to cut the trees down, dry the wood, cooper the casks, maybe even season them first or whatever. And then, and so you're looking at sort of decades long kind of process.
I would say if you want to have long-term success, and you do have to find your own character in that sense. I think with a lot of new distilleries, they go, well, we're going to make whiskey and we're going to do it like this. But then you're just making the same old whiskey. By the sounds of what they're doing, they're trying to really bring in that Pacific Northwest. This is how we do it in the Pacific Northwest. And it's why Scotch is so beloved throughout the world, because everyone knows what Scotch is. It's 3 years and a day in this, and it's made here, and it's done that. So hats off to them, playing the long game.
That's it.
Isn't it, as well.
I think you know what? I think, and I agree with you. I think there's a difficult line to tread between kind of taking, the blueprint of whiskey or gin or whatever spirit it is, and just adding a novelty factor to it in order to say, well, we've put our own twist on it, and saying, well, we are going to really investigate this and scrutinize each step of the process and wonder whether there's a way in which we can add our own, locally derived twist to this, but make sure that at least makes it as good, if not better, than if we were just sort of following the general,
We'll just make it different in that sense. I think that's why Islay whiskies are so loved, because obviously the peat from Islay is so unique. And you either love it or you hate it, but the people who love it will sort of follow you anywhere. So
that's true. The different kind of, I do think the different needs to be good though. You might get some attention from your local audience if you're doing just different, and also just because you're local. But to get that sort of, I think, more widespread acclaim, it has to be good. We did milk and honey a couple of months ago, Israel, and that's a fascinating one. They're maturing in 5 different locations around Israel that are like dramatically different from one another. They've got a humid location, down by the sea. They've got a desert location that's super dry and hot. They've got mountains. They've got the city. Like pretty much any kind of, Israel's obviously, is quite sort of meteorologically diverse, because they can, anything you can think of, like from cold, humid to dry heat, they've got it. And so combining all that together, and that's I think is an amazing tool to have in their arsenal, And Westland, they've got this. So I think it's going to be really interesting from a longevity point of view to see how this distillery pans out. I do think they're here to stay, and they're certainly flying the flag for American single malt more, as much as anyone.
And so when did they turn on their stills then? And how long have they been operating for?
I don't know. I would imagine they are somewhere around their 10th birthday. That would be my kind of finger in the air guess. Yeah. I mean, I was probably about 5 years old, maybe a little bit. They might even be as old as 12, maybe 2010, something like that.
So they're on par with sort of the Ardnarkins, the middle new, not the Kilkenny.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. So the sherry wood it's actually matured in 3 different types of casks, I believe. So you've got Oloroso sherry, no great surprise there. Pedro Jimenez, not a lot of surprise, especially when you come to taste it. But there's also New American Oak in there too. So it's not all just 100% sherry. And it's a
virgin oak in that sense.
Virgin, yeah, for the American oak side of it. I don't know what the ratio is there of casks. But certainly when you come to taste it, which unfortunately, Hugh, you're not going to, but everyone else.
Hopefully it will arrive. I don't know if Tom sent it in the post, but hopefully it arrived.
Yeah, he might well have done. But it's a hard-hitting sherry whiskey, I would say. Although weirdly, I do find it's one of these ones that's a bit of a chameleon. Like, it depends on the time of the day and the circumstances. Every time you go to it, you're like, oh, actually, that's a bit different to what I remember. When I was writing the tasting notes for it, I put down sort of stewed peach because it was just a sort of lighter style of stone fruit that I was tasting. And then when I tasted it more recently, I was like, oh no, that's like proper sultana-y plums and all the kind of richer sherry fruit,
So yeah, depending, so you're either getting the sweetness of the PX or that sort of.
Yeah, that's it. Sometimes it's very much the PX side of it, and other times it's lighter and almost sort of a nice harmony of bourbon and sherry. Yeah.
And in terms of the distillate, so we've been talking about the sort of meaty Benrinnes here. Is it along that sort of side, or is it slightly lighter?
No, do you know what, the distillate is pretty light. They do something weird actually, which is that they make cuts on both distillations. So typically you wouldn't cut the first distillation, right, in Scotch whiskey. You'd just let it run through, collect not all of it, obviously, but you wouldn't collect the end part, but you wouldn't cut the first part, right? The wash still, yeah. With Westland, they cut the heads off the wash for reasons I don't know, but it's obviously an interesting thing to do. They're definitely losing some product in that. Although they don't seem to be bothered about losing product because, like I say, they put all these dark roasted malts in their mash, which, of course, produce very little yield and quite a lot of flavour. So, the accountant at Westland is furious.
It's definitely not run by accountants at this point.
Yeah. But as for what the new make tastes like, I can't exactly remember. But what I do remember is they had a sort of just an element of slightly buttery, darker, almost like brown butter kind of element to it, which I guess is from those darker malts that are put into the mash.
It's amazing how much, again, without sort of dropping it too much, but the second book that we released talks about distillation in 1927s, and they're all talking about those sort of types of malts that they use. But because so because that was sort of the flavour, and then obviously because of the war, then rationing comes in, and they used to use brewer's yeast, but then obviously the brewers needed it, so they didn't sell them anymore. So this sort of development of whiskey sort of it's a hand-me-down sort of recipe, and then as soon as it changed to, well, it's just easier to make it with this, or we get more yield out of this, it sort of becomes gospel. Whilst before it was done very much the way that Westland are doing it. It wasn't about yields; it was more about the sort of flavor profile you get from it, and why we use it for this is because of this, and not because of it make sure we get more liquid out of it. So I think there is definitely, if you're looking at sort of the heritage malts that are being used in experimenting, now in these sort of new distilleries, and they've actually have 6 distilleries who are copying the book that we've just. They're not copying the book, but they're doing a project with us called Project 1927, and they're experimenting with these old techniques which sound like what Westland are doing up in the Pacific Northwest. So hats off to them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I mean, you think sort of all this optimization of yield came a bit later then, in the next sort of boom period, maybe in the sort of 50s.
In the 60s. I would probably say post Second World War.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Everyone
maybe it was sort of, I guess, like a sort of rebound effect of a lot of the closures that happened. They're like, right, we need to make this more economically sound.
Exactly. Maybe the accountants right. Well, I think you'll find that we need to do it. We need to take over now because you guys are just
messing about and just.
I think there is a balance between that, and that, again, in the current whiskey boom that we're in, everyone is now. Well, how do we be a bit different? Well, let's look at different. We're looking at different grains, and now yeast has got this whole big. Research going into it to see how that affects this, and how long you do this and how long you do that, and so it's just changing. It's just moving with the times, and then they'll get to a point where it goes, well, no one's making any money anymore, so we've got to go back to the old way.
Yeah. Well, maybe, although maybe we're just living in an era where there's enough sort of economic stability that, and also curiosity that we can afford to, there's room in a marketplace for experimenters and people who can kind of mess about with malts or yeasts or whatever it is, casks, and there'll be a market for them because, we can afford to kind of support those experiments, I guess.
Exactly, and the distillers now are a lot wealthier than they were back in the 1920s, and they're sort of these big global companies. So as long as Guinness is doing all right, then Diageo have a bit of money in the bank account.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I don't think Guinness is going to change anytime soon, actually. So, we'll see. A very exciting time for Scotch. I think there's a bit of a balancing act. But I do think there's some distilleries or people have thought whiskies are very easy. You just buy it, you sit on it, and you sell it. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. So these distilleries that are sort of pushing boundaries are hopefully going to succeed and just keep moving the industry forward.
I was going to ask, are you buying only mature whiskey or semi-mature whiskey? Or are you buying new making casks?
So now, because of this project that we're doing, Project 1927, which so distilleries are making it now, we're buying new make spirit then. So if you buy the second book, you get first refusal on. We're doing 7 cask samples, 10 CL samples of new make. See what it tastes like, and throughout the 10 years we'll release these samples to see the development of the whiskey. So
wow,
that's the first time we bought new make spirit. You'll get an email being like, do you want to buy it? Buy the samples when they're ready middle of next year. But that's our first time buying new make spirit. And again, when Rupert set up the business back in 2015, so we were exclusive of Royal Mile Whiskies when Rupert was sort of reviving the company. That was just hand to mouth thing, buying. That was we were doing back in 2015. We were doing single cask but bottled at 46%. So we weren't doing cask strength whiskey. And that was Rupert and Leon trying them and going, well, we need to bottle it. And then since 2018, we've been curating stock and sitting on it more, buying younger and sitting on it, and that's where the 3 ranges came through. So small batch, single cask finish. So that was sort of the rejig of it. So now, if you look throughout our releases, we were doing 8 to 10-year-olds, and now we're releasing 15-year-olds. We've just released a 22-year-old because that's us sort of sitting on the stock. So we sit on, buy, bottle 20%, keep 80%. Nice. And that's playing the long game. But we'd love to buy as much new make spirit. But the old independent bottlers, so Gordon MacPhail and Douglas Lang, have these sort of agreements where they could roll their casks and then they get filled out. Whilst I think if we did that, we'll cease to exist because our cash will be all tied up in stock. And we only bottle it when it's ready as well. So we don't want to bottle it 3 years in a day because we need to. We like to have that sort of choice and curate our portfolio in that sense.
We could go on and talk about the Gordon MacPhail's exit from the business, but I think we probably better wrap it up.
Yeah, maybe get a Gordon MacPhail man person to come and talk about that, because I am not well informed.
Yeah, no, I'd just be interested in your opinion on it. But anyway, we'll leave that for another time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll do another bottling with us.
Yeah, for sure. Before we go, and this is as much to you, Hugh, as anyone else. Everyone who's listening, who's obviously a member of Whisky Me, probably received, in fact, definitely received the email about these 2 bottles. Oh no. Oh, my lighting's so bad in here. Let's see if I can. There.
Is that winter malt?
These are. Oh no. I'm trying to it's just glowing it out, isn't it? These are the winter malts, anyway. So we did. It's the first time we've made our own whiskey, and I'm really, really proud of what we've done. So Whisky Me has always been effectively, a way to explore whiskey, a sort of sampling club. We occasionally do collaboration bottlings, as we've done with you guys, and our own bottlings. We've bought a few casks in the past. But this is something entirely different. We've blended our own whiskey, 2 whiskies, in fact. And what we've decided to do is, going forward, we are going to release our own whiskey. Sometimes it will be a blended malt. Sometimes it will be a blended whiskey. Sometimes it will be a sort of world blended whiskey. But we will be releasing a seasonal whiskey for each season. So winter, spring, summer, autumn. And this is the first release. And because we couldn't decide whether or not to make it peated, because we realized through customer feedback that some people really don't like peated whiskey, we decided we released 2 as the inaugural release. And we did, I'm trying to get that to show up. There, that's about the best you're going to get. These graphics are all AI designed. We fed a load of tasting notes into a GPT, and it spat out an image of what this whiskey tastes like, which is Christmas pudding, orange, oak, and a few little spices knocking about.
No steak.
No steak in that one. And then this one here is like campfire, orange, and all that sort of stuff. And it's cool. One of them is a 10-year-old, one of them is a 12-year-old. We managed to get a decent age statement on them. And they are less than $50 a bottle. And I think especially batch 2, which is my favorite, the peated one, although it's not kind of crazy peated, is, I would say, one of my favorite under £50 peated whiskies you can get at the moment. £50 doesn't tend to get you a huge amount these days. And I think it's a cracker. So we had 60 bottles of each. We've literally got, the reason I'm mentioning this is we've literally got, like, I think 5 of batch 1 and 10 of batch 2 left. So if you are thinking or on the fence about getting one, if you buy it now, it will ship in time for Christmas. But even if it doesn't, you'll have it in time for New Year. I think they're pretty tasty. I'm just drinking it all the time at the moment. Hugh, you need one.
Yeah, I do. But congratulations on releasing your own whiskey. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's cool. It's only 60 bottles of each, but it's a start.
You've got to start somewhere.
Exactly. Right. Look, thank you so much. I think paradoxically, this has become one of our longest tastings ever, and yet it was just you and I. Yeah. And we didn't even get anyone from Westland. Imagine how long we would have gone on. Yeah. So thanks so much for sort of jumping in and even giving me a few sort of prompts about Westland as well. I'm sort of managing to dig into my very hazy memory.
I want to hear this Rabbie Burns rendition.
Yeah, well, that's what everyone's doing after this.
That's actually, we warm up your next year on the 28th.
Yeah. Oh, there'll be one coming up. Don't worry. I'll practice my Scottish accent.
Yeah.
Cool. And
thanks for having me, Kristen.
Absolute pleasure. You need to come on again.
Pleasure. And I hope everyone enjoyed your exclusive James E. Benrinnes.
Yeah, I think they did, judging by the comments. And everyone who did enjoy it, thanks so much. And happy Christmas, happy New Year. Hope you have some great drams over the Christmas period. I know I will be, and well, obviously we'll be in touch, and we'll see you in January.
Yeah, all the best.